This podcast is brought to you by Knowledge at Wharton. Please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu for more information.
America's government has failed America, and the nation now faces dreadful catastrophic consequences unless the government changes its ways, says Wharton management professor Larry Hrebiniak in his new book, The Mismanagement of America. He writes, "The country is on an unstable, burning platform of mismanagement, financial and fiscal irresponsibility, ineffective intelligence gathering capabilities, a destructive power structure, and a host of other ominous and potentially dangerous problems. To avoid its disastrous collapse, major management changes and sound leadership are needed." Hrebiniak lays out the changes that must occur and warns that there is no longer time for Americans to shrug their shoulders and dismiss government ineptitude as the inevitable result of politics. Thanks for joining us today, Professor.
Thank you.
You frame America as a failing corporation. Why did you use that analogy?
That's a good question to start with. I had done a lot of work over the years with corporations. I worked with a lot of global organizations, and of course I was familiar with the corporate model. I began looking at the United States, and I thought to myself, this is like America Incorporated. Look at it. It's huge. It's over $3.5 trillion a year. It's a big business. It's diversified. It's in defense, education, media, energy, banking and finance, engineering, science, transportation, you name it. Diversified, large organization globally. It acts like a business. I mean, it hires people, fires people, has healthcare plans, has retirement programs. And so I started looking at it that way and said, if I look at this organization as a large global player, trying to be efficient and effective, run by top management, I'm only focusing on top management, the White House and Congress. Let's see what we can say. Let's compare this organization to a large corporation to see how it's being managed. And as you know, most of my work in the past has been in management, strategic management. So to me, it was an interesting sort of challenge to relate what I know about business to America Incorporated.
In that analogy, you come to the conclusion that the management we have isn't really doing the job for its shareholders or other stakeholders.
This is exactly right.
Okay.
The shareholders, the citizens, taxpayers, and so on, overall, the top management team is not performing. Mm-hmm. They're performing better for some than others, as we know. There's all sorts of data about income discrepancies and equities and so on. But overall, no, they're not performing very well at all.
You describe in your book the consequences that await us if the government doesn't change its ways, and you describe those in a couple of different forms. One of those is in fiscal matters. You warn that we're facing a coming explosion of entitlement spending on things such as Social Security and Medicare as baby boomers prepare to retire. Can you describe that scenario and what kind of dramatic changes need to occur in order to avert that?
If you take a look at our country, take a look at our debt, for example. We're at $9.5 trillion. It's a lot of money. The debt's growing at $2 billion a day, over $200,000 a second. The debt is growing in the United States, some amazing amount. That's bad enough. But the Treasury itself has looked ahead and talked about what I'll call a fiscal gap. They've looked ahead a decade or two or three and said, given the entitlements that are coming up, given baby boomers' growth coming into the market, so to speak, what is the fiscal gap? You know, they projected at $63 trillion. So if we have a $10 trillion debt already with a $63 trillion fiscal gap, what are we going to do about this? We're not confronting the issue. Politicians on both sides of the aisle have ignored it. It's been going on for a long time. What do? In the book I say, for example, they fiddle with deficits. They fiddle while U.S. burns, so to speak. Look at Social Security. Social Security has been turning a profit. And so what do we do with the profits from Social Security? We take the profits, we use it for existing budgets, existing deficit reduction, for example, a la Clinton and some of the others. But what do? We then take IOUs and put them in the Social Security Trust Fund. And we call those IOUs assets. So we're putting debts into the trust fund, calling them assets and saying, we've got all these assets in Social Security. No, we don't. We've got debt that someday is going to come and bite us on the leg. We're going to have to pay for these things. Add in Medicare, Medicaid. Take a look at all of the things we have. And what are our top managers doing? Nothing. They have their head in the sand. They're not motivated to make changes. And why? You know, some of it's obvious. For example, Social Security. Our top people don't worry about Social Security because they're not on Social Security. The way they don't worry about health care. I think people in Congress pay $35 a month for unlimited health care. They don't understand the problems of many Americans when it comes to health care. To them, they've got everything, and they're ignoring the problem. Now, if we don't take care of some of these things coming up soon, if we don't bite the bullet soon, if we don't worry about things like balanced budgets, constitutional amendments to curb spending, if we don't do these things, we are going to find ourselves in a relatively short period of time in a major, major problem that's not going to be reversed very easily.
Other people have talked about this before. In fact, David Walker, the controller of the currency, has been traveling all over the country raising alarms about the coming fiscal problems that we're facing. Do you think it's possible in some way to get the government to recognize these problems that you're talking about?
I think we have to force them. I don't know how, but I guess what I'm saying is I'm hoping, maybe against hope, but I hope some of the politicians, especially supposed new breed of politicians, will make some changes. I mentioned a balanced budget amendment in a constitutional amendment. We tried it with Graham Rudman way back. We tried, there was some other one, I forgot the name of it. It was a kind of fiscal control. None of this has worked because we get around things. They get around things with earmarks. They get around things with spending. I mean, they attach earmarks in Congress to everything. We are running 16,000 earmarks a year now attached to good bills. These things are expensive. They're not going anywhere. So what do we do right here? A constitutional amendment forcing a balanced budget. I would eliminate all earmarks. If something can't pass on its own merits as a bill, it should not be attached to another bill. I remember years ago, Ronald Reagan, vetoed a bill because it had a few hundred earmarks attached to it, a transportation bill. One of the latest versions of the transportation bill, I think 2006, had over 6,000 earmarks attached to the bill. Go one step further. I know maybe I'm going too far afield, but I just read something by our governor, Rendell, in Pennsylvania, about how our bridges need work and how we all know what happened in Minnesota with the bridge collapse and so on. Here's another example. Since 1970, when we passed that Highway Transportation Act, we have had over $700 billion supposedly dedicated for roads and bridges. I think something like 85% of that money, those monies, never reached bridges and roads. They went into senators and representatives' earmarks, private home-based projects. All of this is wasteful. We just have to stop it. No earmarks. A balanced budget, a constitutional amendment, maybe change the tax code. I know I'm getting the field, but our tax code's a mess. Bush came in saying he was going to reduce the tax code, reduce his complexity. In his first term, he increased the tax code by over 10,000 pages. Now, again, he's not alone. Other presidents have done the same thing. Why do we do that? The greater the complexity, the greater the number of loopholes, the more we can hide stuff. And so we just have to say, let's revise the tax code, make it simpler. Let's get away from all of these things that we're hiding. So I'd like to think that we have politicians who are going to wake up, who are going to not be so short-term oriented and become more like managers thinking strategically. Long-term, that we can't create this debt and we can't leave it. By the way, this debt, of course, not only increases the cost of government, it crowds out private investment. And so I'm worried about innovation and private investment in the country because more and more money is being taken up with the debt and with things like military spending. It's burdening future generations. We just finished, I think last year, paying off the last 30-year bonds or bills for Vietnam. And here we go. We're starting now, of course, with Iraq, Afghanistan. We're just picking up where we left off. And so I think it's, we're creating real problems, trade imbalances. I mean, name it. We've got all of this debt. I mentioned the military. I'm not against the military, but when I look at the numbers as part of all of this, I get scared. The military budget's huge. The online budget's huge. And then we have all this offline, black box stuff, where we add more things to the budget. We just keep on adding to the military. I know we have to have a strong military, but if I look at the military, plus the interest on the national debt, just those two things, the military budget and the interest on the national debt, I think of all of the tax dollars we're receiving, I think 40 cents of it goes to those two purposes. We have 60 cents left after the military and interest on the national debt. No wonder we're losing out. We can't afford Amtrak. We can't fix our roads. We can't do so many things. We can't support education because we're spending too much. And of course, not only do we have a military-industrial complex, but a friend of mine just emailed me and said, We also have a military golf complex because the military runs 300 golf courses so worldwide, and you know that's a big expense. And I don't know where that fits into the defense scheme of things, but we have to have those 200-300 golf courses, I guess.
You want to have those generals in a relaxed frame of mind all the time.
Well, that's the other thing. If the specialists in E2s and 3s and E4s and 5s, the enlisted men were using the golf courses, maybe I'd feel a little better, but I have a feeling that's not the case.
Probably not.
Probably not. If they're on the course, they're caddies for the generals, yeah.
A lot of that debt is held by sovereign wealth funds and other foreign interests. Are you concerned about that?
Well, I think we should be concerned about it. For example, we have a lot of countries like China, for example, holding a lot of our debt. Now, probably nothing bad will come from it, but there's always the possibility. For example, we are now head-to-head with China in oil consumption. I mean, they are growing. They are using more and more oil. And if supply stays roughly the same in the world, or even less over the years, in fact, there's going to be a face-to-face, head-to-head confrontation with China about who gets resources. And they'll be fighting with us to see who could waste the most, I guess, because right now we're the biggest waster of resources. Well, just look at that. If they're holding a good chunk of our debt, dollar-denominated debt, and we're fighting with them. And if things happen in the world that we're seeing now, the euro, for example, becoming stronger. I know Europe recently is having some troubles, but we know the euro has grown amazingly. So what if a lot of the countries start investing in euro-denominated debt? The dollar will go down. If the dollar goes down, a lot of these people holding dollar-denominated debt might want to get rid of some of that debt. If they flood the market, what will happen? Our dollar's going to get hurt. It's going to go down the tubes. Our interest rates are going to suffer. We're going to have to raise interest rates in order to be attractive in the marketplace worldwide, which means that inflation will probably go up and a lot of people will not be able to buy homes. A lot of people will default on their credit card debt. And will China do something like that political? I hope not. But in the history of the world, it's happened that economic things overshadow, and economic political things overshadow even common sense occasionally. And so, yes, I do worry. I would like to see us to be a little bit more solvent in the world, put it that way.
A return to the misery index, only much worse than we've had before, perhaps.
I would think so, and I'm very concerned about that.
You've also raised concerns about the government's activity in the area of security. Now, terrorism is on the minds of many Americans, and the government makes sure it stays there. But you seem to think that the war on terror is not going very well.
Well, I have a concern here. I originally, when I was looking at material for the book, didn't know much about the intelligence community. I picked up a couple of things. I talked to some people, and well, I did some work for the intelligence community years ago, but on strategy, organizational design, that sort of thing. So I had some interest. Well, I started digging into things, and I started looking at the management and organizational design of the intelligence community to see if this could work, to see if I could explain from a management point of view why we might be having troubles. And I came up with, you know, some notion. I mean, we're spending a lot of money. I think it's $100 million a day. Is it $100 million a day on intelligence? Now, we like to talk about our big intelligence, the CIA, FBI, NSA. But I started looking at this, I started digging. Without a lot of trouble, I found 64 different organizations involved in intelligence. 64.
Every branch of service has its own.
Every branch of service has its own. There's all sorts of things. I mean, we turn around, in the book I list them. There's so many of them, I can't even remember half of them, but we have so many of them. And what do we find? Not only do we have too many agencies, but we have divisive politics. We don't have cooperation. We have competition across these agencies for money. These agencies don't share knowledge. Here's a quote that came from a book of someone who studied the CIA. He said something like, the quote read, "We don't come to work asking what information can we share with our colleagues to solve problems. We ask what information can we hoard, keep away from others so that we could pursue our own goals." Translation, we can keep our budget high. We become the important agency, and so on and so forth. So we don't have 15 or 16 agencies, we have 64. Unclear responsibility, no knowledge sharing. And just look, we created a czar. What was it, 2004? We created this act which said we need someone to coordinate. We put a czar in charge of things, but what did that mean? If I look at these 64 organizations, there are no solid lines. All the lines are dotted. From a management point of view, what does that mean? We have a czar who has no power. He can appeal to people. He can talk to people at the CIA and say, please do this. And they can say, oh, yes, we'll think about it, and then go and do what they want.
You're speaking of the Director of Homeland Security.
Yes, exactly. It's a powerless position. And so when I look at all of these organizations pursuing their own goals, not sharing information, when I look at poor integration or coordination across these agencies, when I look at any organization that would be this complex with each agency doing its own thing, I call it, when I looked at it, I said the intelligence community this is an organization where people work alone together. They don't like sharing. So what consequences might that have? Well, we know what happened. You know, before 9/11, we didn't know what was going on. After 9/11, if we're not going to cooperate, if we're going to have this complexity, and we're not managing it well, are we missing out on things that are going on out there? Are we not coordinating knowledge sufficiently? I'd like to think we are, but I at least want to raise a red flag. I suggested in the book, for example, that reorganization might be needed. You know, why not have, like, again, following a kind of corporate logic, if we have a corporation, why not break into like 3 groups: foreign intelligence, domestic intelligence, military intelligence. Subsume all the military under one with a head, with authority, and have domestic led by the FBI, have foreign led by the CIA, and then start looking at these groups of people with different agencies inside, collapsing agencies under the 3, and then worry about things like lateral coordination, sharing knowledge, devising ways to share information laterally, to coordinate across these agencies. I'd feel safer if we did that.
You say several times in the book that these problems are so serious that we can no longer just shrug our shoulders as citizens and say, well, that's just the way politics are. There's really not much we can do about it because of the influence of lobbyists, and it's just the nature of the political system. But what can citizens do to affect the kinds of changes you're talking about here, assuming those are the kinds of changes that they want?
That's a hard question. It's an important question, but it's a difficult one, because sometimes, to be very frank, I'm very pessimistic. Citizens love their reality shows. They love doing their things. They don't want to get involved. Now lately, how do I say this nicely? They've been getting involved. Why? Because the price of gas has gone through the roof. Before, when supply was plentiful, gas was cheap, no one complained. If we look at lobbyist activity in our government mismanagement, for example, in 1973, the Middle East cut off all the oil. People screamed and shouted, and then all of a sudden supply came back. And every politician, I think, since has said we're going to reduce oil dependency since '73. Every president-elect, every vice president-elect, everyone running for Congress says the same thing. What's changed? Nothing. So finally people are asking, I think, we've known about this for decades. Nothing's been done. What's going to be done now? So I hear at least consumers screaming. I read 2 days ago in the Wall Street Journal, they're writing letters to their Congress people. They're saying we have to get out of this mess. People, because are getting hurt by the mortgage crisis, they are writing their Congress people. All I can think about is, if there is a silver lining, maybe that's the wrong word, but from all of the turmoil of late, it's that we're getting people involved, that they are contacting Washington. If Washington, and especially with an election coming up, if we get some people in who, for example, go back, eliminate earmarks, who demand balanced budgets, who reduce the power of lobbyists with a real ethics bill, not the one in 2007, which doesn't control lobbyists at all. If we scream for these things and eliminate the power of the lobbyists and wrote our Congress people and demand leadership finally, I'd like to think we might be able to make a change. We've seen it happen before in our history. We've seen it happen in other countries. Who was it? Bob Herbert? Is that his first name? Bob of the New York Times? Yeah, said, 2 years ago, he said, the problem is the U.S. is a nation of nitwits. Now, there are times I believe that's true, quite frankly, including me, but I think we're waking up. I hope we're not going to remain a nation of nitwits. I hope we're going to call our politicians. I hope we're going to exercise the right to vote in this election coming up, not only for president and so on, but, for our Congress people. Now, having said that, I still worry about other things. For example, the gerrymandering laws, the lobbyists. If you look at from a management point of view, lobbyists are big business. There are 35,000 registered lobbyists right now in K Street. I call it in the book, the paved street of gold. 35,000. That's something like 65 lobbyists for every member of Congress. And they're holding money up. They're playing games. And our Congress people are succumbing to that money. But it's more than that. There's something we have to stop in also, and that's what I call in the book the revolving door. Half the people who leave public life and take jobs in the private sector become lobbyists. So stop and think about a system of governance or a system of management that says, on one side of the aisle we have a lobbyist waving money, on the other side of the aisle a congressman who wants that money, whose vanity is being fanned by that money, wow, I'm important, but also looks across the aisle and said, you know, if I play my cards right, I might land that $300,000-$400,000 job in a few years as a lobbyist. Well, what we should do then is ethics, law has to change, the code has to change. We've got to reduce the power of lobbyists, take away their power. We might, for example, focus more on public funding of general elections. I know we've been talking a little bit about that, but it's not happening. You know, Obama backed out of it and other people saying we should do it, but we have to get the power away from the lobbyists, from the big ones. We have to have the ethics bill, and in fact, we have to, well, gerrymandering, you know. I read somewhere, what, in 2004, the last big election, of 435 seats up in the House of Representatives or something, of the 435, I think 35 were contested. The rest, because of gerrymandering, weren't any contest. So imagine people looking at that, why vote? If the election is a shoo-in. And so we have to make some other changes, I admit, but I think with some of these changes, incrementally, one at a time, focus on fiscal, focus on the gas problem, focus on a host of things, maybe people will bounce back.
If a citizen is concerned about the issues you raise here, about the state of Homeland Security, about the looming problem with entitlements, how should they be preparing themselves for the coming election? We've often said that we need to get more voter participation and turnout, but don't we have to have better informed voters? And what are the responsibilities of a citizen who is preparing to vote, especially in light of the upcoming November elections?
We can answer the question by going way back to Cicero and then Jefferson. I mean, basically, what did they say? Cicero said, if citizens don't remain abreast of the issues, what will happen is a management oligarchy will form and control the country, and they will have no power. So Cicero first told us, warned against the danger of being lackadaisical. Jefferson said the same thing, you know, and all the founders. So citizens have a responsibility. I've always felt that people get the leadership they deserve. And if they want better than what they have now, if they want to avoid some of the problems we're facing, what should they do? Their homework. Read up on the issues. Challenge the candidates on the issues. I know that sounds almost trite to say it, but they have to get involved. They have to think about what the issues are. They just can't sit back and let themselves be fooled by the normal TV, quick blurb, soundbite. Pardon me. There has to be a kind of, let's ask hard questions. Let's look into the positions on certain, and there are a lot of things to look into right now. Iraq, the military, Afghanistan, terrorism, the fiscal irresponsibility. There's a lot of things that they should be screaming about to their congresspeople. So I hope I'm not sounding too trite, or I hope it's not falling on deaf ears, but I'd like to see our citizens do more homework, get involved, pursue the tough questions, and go with a clear head to these elections coming up in November.
Is the media doing its job?
No, I don't think so. I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. I know I don't think so. I think I see a lot of things in the media that are alarming. Number one, increased concentration. You have fewer and fewer and fewer large organizations controlling a lot of the news. People align themselves. You know, for example, what is it? The Fox, the Republicans watch, and CNN, the Democrats watch. And we have all these blogs. Someone once said to me, with all these internet blogs and whatever, we have all this news that people are well informed. And I said, not really, because the blogs people are attracted to are those that, you know, it's like preaching to the choir. They go to the blog that gives them the point of view they want. And the blogs don't talk to each other. The people don't talk to each other. It's very narrow. I'm also very sad, and you're being an ex-newspaper man, I can say this and you would understand. Too many of our newspapers are disappearing. People don't read. One beauty about newspapers is that they normally, especially your better newspapers, present both sides of a story. They'll have an editorial saying one thing, and they'll take op-ed on another side. Or there's a lot of stuff that people can read on both sides and say, you know, I like A and I like B, but let's put them together now. It makes for an intelligent consumer of information. We don't have that. Right now, our newspapers are disappearing. The blogs are increasing. Media is becoming increasingly consolidated And I'm concerned about that. What is the old saying back? Big Brother is watching you. And now I think it's getting to be more. I'm getting nervous. You are watching Big Brother. You are reading Big Brother. You are listening to Big Brother. You know, Big Brother is just not watching. I'm afraid that Big Brother is beginning to control a little bit too much. And I don't think that consumers are doing enough to get all sides of a story.
Do you have a sense that the time is right for this kind of message? Perhaps you see some sort of opportunity?
I think so. I hope so. You know, as I started to say before, I called it a silver lining. Maybe that's too strong. But given all the problems we're having, given the price of gasoline, given the mortgage crisis, given the fact that people are getting hurt, maybe this is what we need for a kind of social revolution of sorts, that people are going to scream and shout, that they're going to vote their conscience, that they're going to come along and demand changes from their government. Now, we have to be careful here. Take gasoline. You know, right now, people are talking, politicians are talking gas holidays and additional drilling. Now, well, first of all, I have some problem with the drilling. If we drill, for example, in the Arctic National Refuge, we will increase, in 10 years, we will increase our use of gasoline from our own sources by 3%. Hardly enough to make a difference, number one. But number two, if we get enough of this increased supply, by lowering the gas tax or whatever, by doing other things, we're just going to increase demand. We are not controlling demand. So I would like to see us now, for example, turn to people and say, this hurts. Gas prices are high. But look what's happening from gas prices being high. People are now buying more efficient cars. The demand side is changing. People are responding the way they should respond. Maybe what we should do is raise the gasoline tax. Allow on income tax, for example, truckers and others to have deductions. That's their job. But maybe there's a way to control consumption and get people to think more in terms of efficient use of gasoline and resources, and that would force further our politicians to take some action. Maybe I'm too pie in the sky, but I'd like to think that people are going to wake up and see the problems here and want us to do something about them.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for giving me a forum to talk about my new book. I appreciate it.
For more information, please visit knowledge.wharton.upenn.edu.